This is Turn One Thoughtseize. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Ari.
And this is episode 101. We should probably figure out a title for it. We'll get there. So this week is Ari's first show in the sort of post episode 100 era, or just the post episode 100 era. The post is next week, I guess. We are going to do housekeeping. As always, going to go over some tournament results. We got a couple of interesting topics. Deck building with packages is a topic that I really find interesting, and something that I think is valuable to sort of more quote unquote high level players. And Proliferate is coming back into standard, which is also really interesting. So there's a lot of kind of stuff that's been, I think, waiting in the wings, potentially, that is counters related, that is ready, perhaps ready to pop off. So we'll cover that. We'll quick go over some decks that we're playing, and then wrap it up, put a bow on it, and send it off into the world. See what happens. Right. Housekeeping. The Deck Builder affiliate link is still active. It is still going strong. So thank you for everybody that has checked it out. It is https://store.decked.builder.com/T, the number one Thoughtseize. The S is required because it forces, if you don't use SSL, it will not let you in. So I don't know, if you use Firefox, it won't make a difference, but if you use anything else, you have to type the S. I learned that the hard way because I was like, why isn't this link working? They're like, what are you talking about? And then we figured it out. We got there. The Patreon as well is sort of still live. It is sort of under reconstruction in terms of like figuring out what people want and what we can reasonably provide. So you can go and check that out. It's patreon.com/Turn One Thoughtseize, all spelled out. And so Ari, why don't you, for anyone who may not be familiar, just kind of introduce yourself, and then we'll take it away to the tournament results.
Yeah, I'm Ari Lax. I've been playing competitive Magic for a long time. I've played on the Pro Tour for the last 10 years or so. Results here and there. I've got some GP top 8s over the years. I won a Pro Tour in 2014 with the wonderful actual Thoughtseize. They somehow let that one back, and I took full advantage. And right now I still playing on the Pro Tour, playing events, writing for Star City, and I also blog every so often when I have an idea that just kind of comes to me and I put it up. So all about Magic content, talking about the game basically whenever.
Okay, very cool. There was a bunch of stuff recently. Most recently was Magic Fest Calgary, and interesting. So 956 players. That's a big event, man. Wow.
Very big for Calgary.
In Calgary, yeah. That's I couldn't even point to Calgary on a map. And that's my unfortunate like East Coaster like view of geography. I'm like, I know Toronto, Montreal, and then Vancouver. Everything in the middle. Total confusion.
My understanding, there's not a lot of Canada in the middle. It's just where people go to retire or go to fight bears. So,
yeah, or hunt. I guess hunting is a big thing. It's kind of a thing here. I don't know. There's people do not think of Connecticut as a place that has rustic elements, but it's not like on Who's the Boss. There's all kinds of stuff here. Super duper city, farm. We have a lot of farm. And with farm comes people that hunt, in my experience. So this Valakut deck that won, apparently this is Attila Fur. So this Valakut deck, interesting. It is called Valakut, and I guess it was billed as Jund Breach or something like that. Or
Yeah, so the Primeval Titan decks have been split for a while between just raw Scapeshift and Primeval Titan, and then a Through the Breach list that might have a couple Scapeshifts. I think the last year or so, the Scapeshift list has been most popular. I think you'd have to go back a couple years. About 2016 was when Through the Breach was really popular. When I think there was a Grand Prix Indianapolis where Rob Pisano lost to Brandon Burton, aka Sandy Dog, in the finals. But this is kind of a big showing for the Breach version of that deck. And they interviewed Attila at the tournament, and he was saying, in his player profile, that he found the actual Primeval Titan deck, the Scapeshift one, a little too slow. You can be outraced by Phoenix a little more, whereas the Breach deck's a little faster, but a little more inconsistent. And it looks like his big innovation was finding a way to kind of splice in some black mana to the deck for Fatal Push as the removal spell, which can take care of Thing in the Ice, regardless of whether it's transformed or not, as opposed to Lightning Bolt, which is kind of at a bit of a low right now. Not only is, the entire Izzet Phoenix deck base Lightning Bolt proof, but it feels like a lot of other decks see that Izzet Phoenix has all these Lightning Bolts and can dig to them really effectively and have to adapt to be Lightning Bolt proof as well. So everything's adjusting back towards Fatal Push being the best one mana removal spell for most decks.
Yeah, so it looks like he basically swapped 3 fetches. He put Bloodstained Mires instead of 3 other red fetches, and then added a basic swamp and a Blood Crypt. And that seemed to be enough. I mean, it's he's got 1 Assassin's Trophy and 2 Fatal Push. So it's, I think for number of sources, it seems about right. And I also like he had a main deck Woodfall Primus, which is just a good it's a good way to sort of mess up other decks. Like sometimes it's a 5/5 trample Stone Rain, double Stone Rain. For anybody that is not familiar with Woodfall Primus, it's 5 green, 6/6 trample. Oh, it's a Tree Folk. Sorry, it's relevant text. It's a Tree Folk Shaman, and when it comes into play, you destroy target non-creature permanent, and it has Persist. So when it dies, it comes back to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter. So if you Through the Breach, it comes in, you get the ETB, you get to swing in for 6, and then it dies. The Persist trigger brings it back to the battlefield. You get another, blow up another thing, and you still have a 5/5.
Yep. I think notably Woodfall Primus is really good out of this deck. One of the decks that you're kind of afraid of with this kind of archetype is the War Prison deck, and their way to stop the Valakut part of this deck is via Witchbane Orb, and the Woodfall Primus lets you destroy it, take out their Welding Jar or whatever, and then the second destruction is probably going to be able to take care of it in a lot of situations where they haven't fully set up. And because you have Summoner's Pact to find it, you can kind of put the pieces together fast enough to matter. Yeah.
So I mean, if you can very realistically, like, does he have any other arcane spells?
Unfortunately, no.
No. My head for some reason, there was another one. So you're priced into paying the 5 mana for it. But with Simian Spirit Guide, you can hit that on turn 3, right?
Yeah.
1, 2. So yeah, I mean that's also, like I said, double Stone Rain on turn 3 that leaves you with a 5/5 is still pretty good. I mean that is going to win many games.
Yeah. With all the ramp, you can turn 3, just search for Tomorrow on turn 1, Sakura Tribelder on turn 2. The turn 3 Dream isn't that difficult with this deck, and even more so, there's a lot of turn 3 Primeval Titan attacks that are shockingly close to lethal.
Right. And then what else? Oh, single Scapeshift kind of hanging out. That's fine. Faithless Looting over 4 Farseek. So normally you see four Farseek, like just a lot of like ramp. The Faithless Looting for card selection is interesting. I'm pretty much, I mean, Farseek is kind of a dopey spell.
Yeah, and with Through the Breach, you just have more bad cards that you sometimes don't want. You know, the second Through the Breach is kind of overkill.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of want to get there with the first one.
Yeah.
And then Engineer Explosives, 1 Prismatic Omen. So like there's the pieces for the sort of easy mode escape shift kill are still here.
Notably, no Anger of the Gods or Other Sweeper, no Relic of Progenitus. Those are the cards that have to go if you're adding the Through the Breach part of the deck.
Yeah. So then sideboard, Chalice, Damping Sphere, Leyline of the Void, 2 Obstinate Baloth, Ravenous Trap, Reclamation Sage, Shattering Spree, 2 Slaughter Games. This is amazing. This is a card that we talked about in our, like, what was Modern like in 2015 from last episode. It was like, Slaughter Games was actually a card that you could play. And here it is. 2 Tireless Tracker and an Unraveled Ether.
There was no Amulet Titan in this top 8, but Slaughter Games is kind of the cheat code to the Primeval Titan mirrors, right? You know, you take out their Titan. It's all about who can resolve the Titan first, but Slaughter Games costing 2 less often means that you can have your answer out a turn before when there isn't really another great, effective, proactive answer to it.
Get them. I mean, that's... Yeah, I was thinking... I'm trying to... But yeah, can't be countered. Yep. Slaughter Games. It's Slaughter Games. Excellent.
Yep.
Death Shadow here. This Sam Party said afterwards he played 2 Vryn's Prodigy instead of the 2 Faithless Lootings that people had been playing, and he seemed to think that it was manifestly superior, and I'm inclined to agree.
Yep. My experience has been that the red mana for Faithless Looting can be awkward. Guaranteeing that you're putting yourself down a card is kind of awkward. The flashback is kind of expensive. Faithless Looting just wasn't the most exciting card in these Death Shadow decks, but you kind of wanted some way to dig. And Jace Vryn's Prodigy gives you a little more. I don't know if it's 100% the right card, but it's moving in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, I wonder if there's like... I think of other stuff that's like that. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
You just go whole hog and play Benthic Biomancer. It's like less upside, but more upfront.
Yep. Also notable about this list is we've totally gone off of Serum Vision and just all in on Thought Scour and Mishra's Bauble, the fast cantrips. Not really as interested in the kind of card selection we've seen out of Death Shadow. It's really just the archetype has drifted away from that towards just the most aggressive stance it can take.
Yeah, I have like a love-hate relationship with Serum Visions, because sometimes I'm like, this is the greatest card ever, and then sometimes I'm like, why did I even put this card in my deck? And I think when the plan is I want to kill you as fast as possible, I don't think there's a deck that does that also runs Serum Visions. It's just like,
yeah,
the payoff is too far delayed, and then this is always when people are like, oh, they should just unban Preordain. It's like, that's not the answer either.
Not really.
Other stuff, let's see. Braid, Collective Brutality, Disdainful Stroke, Engineer Explosives, 4 Leyline of the Void, Kulligan's Command, Liliana. Yep. Leyline is another one. I have a lot of feelings. I think that the four Leylines, if you're on that plan, I think 4 is the correct number. Maybe 3. I don't know. Just get like, it requires so much commitment. I guess.
I think that's just kind of a statement saying that, like, while surgical extraction is an option, it just kind of isn't enough against Dredge. You know, you saw a lot of lists before that had Anger of the Gods and surgical, but Sam is kind of putting together Leyline as the hate card in that direction, and then Engineered Explosives, which we'll get to that actually in the next list, but it's kind of required for a couple cards that are bouncing around the format as opposed to Anger. Leyline is just really sending the message home to the Dredge players.
Yeah. So humans, came in top 4, and much of this is what you would expect. Interesting. Oh, nope, never mind. That's not interesting. That's Gemstone Mine. For some reason, I looked at it quick and I was like, they're playing Gemstone Cavern? Like, that's super aggro. But they're not. That would be a bad idea.
Gemstone Mine is interesting, though, because you'll look at the sideboard. You'll see one note of this list is there's only 2 Ancient Ziggurats and then a Gemstone Mine, and a Mana Confluence. And that's because some of the sideboard cards are non-creature spells that tend to cost 2 or more. So that's kind of trying to rein back in that drawback to the initial humans list.
Yeah. So champion, the stuff that you're like, oh, that's interesting. 2 Cassic Malcontents. I like this card a lot. I think it is at the very least it gives you an out to like ensnaring bridge decks where you're just like, all right, well, nobody can attack. I'll just build out like 12 guys and then casting Malcontents, dumb you for 12. Thanks for playing. Oh, you didn't have your Witchbane Orb? Wow, you're dead.
Yep.
Sideboard, Auric Champion. Haven't seen them in a while.
So that was the card that it's been coming back recently, and that's been what's forcing Grixis Death Shadow to have answers to creatures that aren't, red or black removal. So that's why the Engineered Explosives is showing up. Otherwise, got it. I think Ben Friedman was talking about having a Piracy Charm. So that's blue instant. It gives a creature Island Walk. It makes a player discard a card, or it gives a creature +2/-1, and that's a way to kill Auric Champion.
Yeah, so, it's the color shifted Funeral Charm.
Yep.
From Planar Chaos.
People have been diving deep to kill this one.
That is very deep. That's wow. I mean, yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Glare of Heresy. I'm trying to if we're going down the Piracy Charm rabbit hole.
There's a lot of cards like that in the format that are just like, oh wow, this performs this exact job extremely well.
2 Chalices and 3 Damping Sphere. This is another sort of nod. Gemstone Mine, Mana Confluence. Deputy Detention. He's just good.
Yeah, it's just a generic good card. It's my one weird experience with Deputy Detention has been that in the creature mirrors, that card gets really weird with Phantasmal Image. Not only because you're like, well, my opponent could have a deputy, so when do I want to deploy my image? But then when you deploy your deputy, you're like, well, what if they image my deputy? What happens? So that card it's very good, but it can get kind of weird.
Huh. So what does happen?
So there's a lot of options. So if you have, let's say it's a human's mirror and you've deployed a Mantis Rider and Phantasmal Imaged it, they can deputy your original Mantis Rider and exile both of them. Or they can deputy the Phantasmal Image and just kill it. But then if they deploy deputy and you have an image, then you can image their deputy and exile their deputy and get back the things that were exiled by it. There's also the weird interaction where if they exiled, a creature and an image of it, they're both entering the battlefield at the same time if they come back. So you can't recopy the other thing that was exiled because it's not in play beforehand for the image to actually choose. Yeah.
There's a lot going on there. There's a lot to unpack. All right, so proceed with caution if you are expecting a lot of humans mirrors. Maybe brush up on those rules because they're going to come up. And if you're at an FNM or something and there's only either no judge or an L1 or something like that, they may have a difficult time disentangling that if it gets too thick. Dismember, Grafdigger's Cage. I'm fine with that. One Kumbal, Console of Allocation. Sure. I mean, I guess in a world where Phoenix is trying to cast 3 spells in a turn, if you're just double Lightning Helix them so they can get a Phoenix back.
Yep. Okay. It's not amazing against anything, but it's good against Phoenix. It's good against Shadow. It's good against War Prison. It's just generally good in a lot of spots. People are trying to cast spells.
Yeah. And then Phoenix, this looks, so this was this was the interesting Phoenix list. 1 snap, 4 thing in the ice, 4 arc light, 1 echoing truth in the main, 3 surgical extraction in the main, along with 3 pyromancer's ascension.
Yep. So
what do we think about this?
So Pyromancer Ascension's been a card that's just kind of ticking up across all the lists. I believe Peter Ingram had a lot of them at the SCG Open in Cincinnati a couple weekends ago. But it's powerful, it's unique, it solves a lot of problems for the deck. Again, watching the SCG Open from Cincy, you can watch Peter just kind of take over matches against Amulet and War Prison with Pyromancer Ascension that normally you'd expect the Phoenix deck just kind of be locked out of because they have to win via the combat step. Even with only Mana Morphos to kind of increment your mana, you can go really deep into your deck over a given turn with it, and it's really hard to lose once it enables. So that card has been very impressive. Echoing Truth was from, I believe, Guillaume Matignon's Grand Prix winning list a couple weekends ago. Just another way to interact with a generic permanent like Ensnaring Bridge. Notably, I played some with Phoenix between then and now, and I didn't have a copy of a card like it. And I noticed that you would just be 100% dead to your opponent making an Awoken Horror. So if Thing in the Ice transformed, you just die to the 7/8. Right. Whereas if you have something like Echoing Truth, you have a way to get it off the battlefield, even if it's not permanently. And the 3 surgicals, people have just kind of ticked up to the 2 to 3 range. So 2 versus 3. The other ones are probably going to be in the sideboard somewhere. So,
yeah. So the interesting thing to me is, it's like we're at that point. Like this is the world that we live in now, where people are main decking 3 surgical extractions, and it has not made Phoenix. I guess, or I would say Phoenix or Dredge, but I think it affects Phoenix more. Asterisk. I think Phoenix is still a stronger deck in general. Like disrupting you're like, oh, you got my Phoenixes, okay. Like Pyromancer Ascension, Snapbolt, Thing in the Ice. You're still whatever. Those decks are still winning. Those decks still win in a world where people are just like, turn 0 surgical extraction, your prized amalgam. Like that is the thing that is sort of telling to me in terms of just the power level.
Let's see, sideboard here, we've got a couple Blood Moons, couple of Braids, standard mix of a bunch of 1-ofs in your deck that's going to cantrip to them. Ceremonious Rejection, Dispel, Ravenous Trap for Dredge, a Jace the Mind Sculptor, and a Ral Izzet Viceroy, a Beacon Bolt, an Entrancing Melody, a Flame Slash, and a Shatterstorm, and then 2 Spell Pierce. Nothing too out of the ordinary. There's some minor debates like whether Threads of Disloyalty or Entrancing Melody is the better card that does exactly that, or whether Ral Izzet Viceroy or Chandra Torch of Defiance is the best Planeswalker. But this is generally the spread of cards you'd expect from this deck. Nothing too out of the ordinary.
Yeah. Man, that's tough. I really like Chandra. I think that how fast is she? It takes her a little while to ultimate, right? I
think it's the same tick up as Ral, because Ral's -8 starting at 5, and she's -7 starting at 4.
Oh, got it. Okay. Yep. He's a plus. Oh, I thought his plus was a +2. Never mind.
Yeah. His minus notably can deal significantly more damage, and it's likely to kill a Tarmogoyf. It's basically kind of like that versus costing 1 less in the mana ability. Both of them get exiled by Celestial Purge as the one other random thing, so it's not really a point of comparison.
Yeah. All right. I mean, I guess, yeah, spice to taste.
Yep.
You're gonna save yourself $6. You can buy the Ral Izzet Viceroy. Blue Moon. So this is kind of just Phoenix-less Phoenix. It feels like a lot of that. It's because it's a Thing in the Ice deck now, and so you go, all right, I can either Snapbolt you or Snap Cryptic you out of the game. If you can beat that, you probably can't beat a 7/8, and vice versa. So,
it's kind of. like a weird mix of one-ofs in this list. Just kind of, you know, a Burst Lightning, a Flame Slash. One Ancestral Vision is the one that just gets me. It's like, when are you trying to suspend this? What are you doing?
That is perplexing. That's a...
Yeah.
I wonder if... every once in a while there's like a typo.
No.
Like this, like Ancestral Vision maybe should have been like the 4th Serum Visions, but I guess not. I don't know. I got nothing. Yeah, I have no realistic like time where I'm like, oh yeah, obviously.
Yeah, I'm not a Blue Moon expert. There's notably 4 Remand, which is a pretty big statement about the format. Remands, you know, the one-ofs are Logic Not Negate, just a ton of Remands, which I don't know what the statement is about the format, because there's not like all the Gurmag Anglers in the world or all this other stuff, but it's, you know, this is Remand. It's in the deck.
Right. So I have feelings about Remand. So I have been constantly, I refuse to give up on some sort of like rug aggro-ish thing. And there was a list that popped up that had like, it was basically Rug Delver but with Terramander. And I've been tinkering around with it, but it ran, one of the versions that I played ran just straight for remands, and I expected it to be terrible, and it wasn't, and that was very surprising to me. So the advantage that I felt like it gave me was people were just like full on, everything is so tuned and so tight that like they don't have extra lands to recast their Faithless Looting if you remand it. So if you're up against like a Death Shadow or a Phoenix, something like that, they're running 17, 18, 19 lands, whatever. You can straight up time walk them and get a card, and eventually you just bury them, because then they're like a turn behind, 2 turns behind, 3 turns behind, and you're like, oh, here's my Terramander. You don't have anything to block it. Take 5. You put them on a 4-turn clock at most, and if they can't kill that Terramander in a way that really is sort of remand resistant, I guess, then you're pretty much riding him, 15 damage, 3 turns. And then as you are digging into your deck, you start, once you hit the point where you're like Cryptic, and then 2 turns later Snap Cryptic, then you've locked them out functionally. So it shouldn't be good, but if you're also playing Cryptics and Snapcasters, it seems to work.
Yep.
Which is why I've never owned Cryptic Commands before. I recently bought some Cryptic Commands, and I bought a second Snapcaster Mage, which is shocking. It's so against type. There were people on the Discord were like, "Are you okay?" I was like, I need to play. I need to relive the glory of like Rug Delver with Gitaxian Probe, and I know it's never going to happen again.
No,
but
not in the slightest.
I just really want I want Shardless Agent in Horizons. That would make me really happy.
We'll see on that one. I don't have expectations in any direction on that one.
Yeah. All right. Still in the top 8. Dredge. This appears to be literally the exact same Dredge list that everyone is running, because there is nothing. This is the Dredge list. There is nothing else that you need to do until the meta changes.
Yeah, the only things I like, the flex slot is like, well, there's 2 thugs in this deck, and then 1 Dark Blast instead of 1 Golgari Thug and 2 Dark Blast, or like there's a Ghost Quarter in the main deck instead of a Dakmor Salvage. That's it.
Yeah, I mean those are things that you could like forget in your deck box. You're like, oh, I guess I'll just run this version because the other one's in my pocket.
Yeah.
Green Black Rock, 4 Scavenging Ooze.
It's
Getcha.
2 Dark Confidant is the thing that gets me here.
This was a thing because it used to be time ago. It was gospel that you absolutely had to run the 4 Dark Confidants, right? Because it was Thoughtseize, Dark Confidant, Liliana of the Veil. The problem is when Dredge is around, Thoughtseize, Dark Confidant, Liliana of the Veil is awful. Like that is not a sequence that you want to start running. And so for when I went to North Carolina earlier or last year, I went to SCG in Charlotte. SCG Charlotte, that's what it was. There was like not a hubbub, but there was a discussion around cutting the 4th Dark Confidant for something else. And it was the second Kalitas because Dredge had just come back to like completely roll the event previous, and people were like, okay, what are we going to do? Other people that play fair decks. And the solution was cut 1 Dark Confidant and run 2 Kalitas in the main deck. And apparently Luca Fanazzi has decided to cut it down to 2 and run 1 Kalitas. This is 2 Dark Confidant Kalitas, 4 Scavenging Ooze. It seems super aggro because you're never... I'll get back to that. 4 Tarmogoyfs, 3 Tireless Trackers, and then Assassin's Trophy, 2 Collective Brutalities, push Inquisition, 1 Maelstrom Pulse, which is correct. It is, as a green-black player, it should be against your religion to not play a Maelstrom Pulse in the main. And 2 Thoughtseize, 4 Lilianas, 2 Spell Bombs. The problem with Scavenging Ooze is it is too slow. It just is. You're choked on green mana a lot. It just... I don't think playing 4 of them solves that problem.
Yeah, especially because it becomes increasingly hard to push each of them out of bolt range in the matchups you care about that. It's... And especially, you have 2 Neil spell bombs too. That's a lot. That's just a lot of spots reserved for that exact thing.
Yeah, I'm clearly, this list top 8'd. This is not a list that I would be likely to bring. If anything, I would. I think at this point I'm probably just, if I'm playing this deck, I'm splashing white and I'm just playing like Abzan with Anafins of the Foremost and Kaya Orzhov Usurper, like that kind of stuff. That's more, it doesn't have like a mana activation requirement, because I'm still like, there are definitely times where you're like, my Scavenging Ooze ran away with the game, and that will absolutely happen. Is that going to happen when the first 2 Scavenging Oozes that you've run out have eaten removal spells? I don't know. I guess maybe, but is that the best use of those turns? I don't know.
Skeptical as well.
Yeah. Sideboard though, Collective Brutality, Damnation, Damping Sphere, 2 Deglamers. Apparently they're just a purist, where they refuse to run the Born of the Gods version of this spell.
Unravel the Ether.
Duress, Engineered Explosives, 3 Fulminator Mages. I like that a lot. 3 Surgicals, and a second Kalitas. I don't know. I think if you're going to run Kalitas, I really want to. I just... Because when you're playing that game 1, and you're like, all right, Dredge, I am about to slam the door. You've killed all my other stuff that is relevant. Boom, Kalitas, and they're just like, oh, by the way, we play 3 Conflagrates now.
Yep.
Getcha, or like Lightning Axe, and then you've got nothing. So I want the second one. That's my...
Notably, there's not like in the sideboard here, there's often like a Nissa Vital Force or some other random, like, name a green or black planeswalker or legendary creature that has some mythic rare symbol on it that just ends up in the sideboard, and there isn't one of those here.
Yeah, and I have had a lot of success with Nissa Vital Force. She's just a very good, like, if you're slugging it out in the mid-range mirror, she's unbelievable. Blue-White Control. Yep. This deck just won't go away. Snaps, Colonnades, for Field of Ruin in the main. That's another, like, as the colors consolidate, if people are playing like just blue-red, just green-black, just blue-white. Having those decks, I think, all ran. Oh no, the Blue Moon didn't. Oh, because they run
Blood Moon.
Yeah, sure. But just decks having very ready access to the option of playing for Field of Ruin seems to have something of a depressing effect on the big mana land decks.
Yep.
Or at least Tron. Absorb, Condemn, 3 Cryptic, Hieroglyphic Illumination, Logic Knot, Mana Leak, Negate. Speaking of one-ups, holy crap.
They're all pretty standard for this deck. I think notably this list has one more Snapcaster Mage than I think I'm usually used to in this archetype. I think because of, you see a 4 Snapcaster Mage in the Jeskai list where you're trying to cast Lightning Bolt your opponent, maybe snap it back, deal damage. But the blue-white deck, it's a little less effective. You need to actually have drawn, like, your Opt or, like, your Opt and not your Hieroglyphic Illumination to really get good, flexible Snapcaster use. So 3 is kind of on the high side here.
Baneslayer, Lyra, Negate, Dispel, Celestial Purge, 2 Rest in Peace. That's surprising to me.
Which the
Rest in Peace. In this deck, I mean, I guess then you're just like on the Teferi Jace thing. You're like on the Planeswalker plan.
There's not really any other way to beat Dredge other than land a Rest in Peace with this deck. So you're kind of in this spot where, because of Terminus, you actually have effective ways to. You don't have to have Rest in Peace on turn 2. You do need to draw it over a reasonable term of the game, but you get to that point by Terminusing a lot. I haven't tried this a bunch since the printing of Creeping Chill, but this was how it worked last summer, back when Dredge had everything else but that, where you could extend the game, find the Rest in Peace, and then eventually lock them out with it. Just because Terminus puts their creatures in somewhere they can't access them immediately.
Right.
Notably, only 1 Stony Silence. There's not a lot of artifact decks going around, and they tend to be... the Ensnaring Bridge deck that's not going to be trying to really artifact activation you out of the game. They're sideboarding into like Tezzeret's or Hardened Scales, which just has all these Nature's Claims, but also can never beat Blue-White anyways. So,
yeah, I wonder if these Rest in Pieces are better as like Wheel of Sun and Moon. That's
a good question. I don't have a good answer there because I guess you probably need to clear their Conflagrate is the one thing that would not have been removed already.
Okay, sure. Yep, I could see that.
But Wheel of Sun and Moon is worth thinking about there.
That was the most recent big stuff other than Cincinnati, which was a couple weeks ago. Cincinnati was there was a classic. It was a team open, which is sort of always a weird thing to evaluate in terms of meaningful data. There was a couple of interesting builds.
War Prison with Thopter Sword, which is was the Dominic Harvey's list that he won a classic with a couple weeks before, so no Chalice of the Void in that deck. A couple amulet decks. Notably, one of the amulet decks was on a team of 3 amulet players, so it was kind of just the think tank.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I guess no bad matchups, right? That's their thing.
That's their hashtag.
Yeah, Dredge. Yep, one Golgari Thug, 2 Dark Blast. The more defensive variant.
Yeah.
This Eldrazi taxes. Hey, more power to you. I guess.
I've tried a lot of these decks, and I don't actually know if Thought Not Seer is still a good Magic card in Modern.
I can tell you it's very good on turn 2.
Yes, that's always been the case and always will be.
So if you're in the market for that, yes, I can say for certain it is good. Past that, with so many, like, it used to be when Lightning Bolt is king, right? Thought Not Seer is great. When people are playing Lightning Axes, you feel like kind of a goof, because then they can Lightning Axe your Thought Not Seer, discard a Dredger, and then dredge off the draw.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, right? Maybe it's this particular build. We talked about it a little bit before we started recording. The 4 Ghost Quarter, 4 Eldrazi Temple, 4 Tide Hollow Sculler deck is probably going to have some issues. I don't know. I mean, trying not to, right? We try to avoid results oriented thinking. Hey, top 8'd a thing, so that does happen.
Notably, a couple of Tron decks in this top 8 that they weren't showing up at the Grand Prix, but Tron did pretty well at this event. Nothing too special going on with a lot of the lists because it's Tron and they're all just Tron cards. But
yeah, I mean, it looks like they're back to so mono green running relics in the main.
Yep.
World Breaker, 7 toughness with reach, pretty good against Phoenix. Everything else is 4 Thragtusk. I did play against somebody recently on Magic Online, and I was like, oh, there's the first Thragtusk. All right, might have one more. And then it was literally like runner Thragtusk, and I was like, excuse me? I don't...
Wait. What's the flavor text today? You should have saved a spear for the next one.
Yeah. I'll always carry 2 spears. Yeah, sorry. I didn't have 6 spears with me. I lost that game, weirdly.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah. I think the other big event is the Mythic Invitational, where it's kind of hard to talk about replicating deck lists from that for Standard or even Best of One, because so much of it is this kind of back and forth duo. Like, you've got to play it against Mono Red and Esper exactly, but nothing really else. It's just kind of worth noting that the decks that everyone kind of expected, which were Esper Control, Mono Red, Mono White, were the ones doing the best in that tournament. And a lot of the decks Standard that are kind of hard to, are really, leaning on their sideboard to fight those strategies. Like, Mono Blue needs their Entrancing Melodies against Mono White, and the green-black decks all need their sideboard against everything. Those were the decks you didn't see nearly as much of that didn't do as well in that Best of One tournament. So if you're going to try to ladder up this month in Best of One, it's probably just the traditional stuff that you'd be expecting that you're going to go with Gruul Warriors kind of being the one exception as a deck that's kind of interesting. A couple of Nullhide Ferox lists that were worth taking a look at out of that tournament, but that's about it for Best of One Standard.
Yeah, and so the sort of the gear shift there is Andrea Mangucci won $250,000.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's a real thing.
Yep.
And so I'm sure that many of our listeners watched it. The coverage I thought was very good. It was rocky in the beginning, and trying to broadcast anything live is always like hairy. Like there's always something. And it was funny for me because going back to that, the first interview, like our first interview was Ethan Fleischer on that very floor in that very event. And the comment that I got most of all was, why is there so much background noise? And I was like, well, it's a giant convention floor and there's umpteen thousand people here. It's loud. It just is. And there's nothing you can do about it. And there's no way to unless you have it inside a dome, it is a live sporting event in the same way, So yeah, deal with it. Exasperating. Complaining Magic players sometimes are exasperating to me.
Quickly skimming through the deck list from that, the one thing that stands out to me as exciting is Legion War Boss is just a Magic card in that format. It's kind of impressive in mono red mirrors because you can potentially get 2 bodies out of it in a kind of attrition based matchup. Kind of impressive against Esper Control. So that's just the one card that I thought people played a little bit would be interesting. But yeah, the PAX East is everything. And if you want to watch replays of that event, I would advise starting round 2 and going forward. Round 1 was a little dicey, but everything else is great.
Yep. Yeah, I'm interested to see, if I'm always looking for decks that are dominant in Standard that have the potential to cross over in some way into older formats. I've played against a lot of Reclamation decks in Modern recently.
That's another remand deck that's it's kind of using remand as a way to, we're talking about bridging the gap to lethaling your opponent with Terramander. Well, you bridge the gap to just taking all the rest of the turns for the rest of the game.
Yeah. And I mean, I did not expect to have Expansion Explosion cast against me in Modern, but it turns out it still kills you. Like, Expansion Explosion for 15 is you're just as dead in Modern as you are in Standard. So I guess don't those cards, if you're playing those decks in Standard, like, hang on to those cards. I think this block has the potential to be a sort of Innistrad-esque sort of format player where the cards are powerful enough and work well enough together that you can just go, yep, I played this deck in Innistrad Standard and I tweaked a couple of things and now it's Modern Junt. Like, those decks I think are, if not fully coalesced, I think probably after War of the Spark, probably you go, oh, okay, yeah. This Reclamation deck is now 6 cards away from a Modern deck, maybe 10 cards away. That's my gut. I'm just like,
yeah,
don't get rid of your guild's cards.
It's also a multicolored set. Those always tend to play well in older formats. So
sure, yeah.
Should we talk a bit about some upcoming cards from War of the Spark and kind of tie into the first topic here?
So the first thing, as far as like main topics, I wanted to talk about deck building with packages. This is something we touched on it in previous shows, because it's something that people will talk about, I think offhandedly, but not in a, they don't have necessarily a constructed, sort of like a rubric way to think about deck building. And one of the things that I have started to do, if I'm not starting from like a whole cloth, like ground up brew, I keep these little files on my deck builder on my phone that are like the core of a certain deck. So I have like an Arclight Phoenix core deck that's just 4 Phoenix, 4 Looting, 4 Gutshot, 4 Lightning Bolt, 4 Manamorphose. Like, those cards are probably going to be in every Arclight Phoenix deck in some number. And most of them probably in the 4 of. I have, when I'm building a BGX deck, I normally start with 4 Dark Confidants, 4 Tarmogoyfs, Fatal Push, Inquisition, Liliana the Veil, 1 Maelstrom Pulse, previously noted. So I don't have to like redo that work every single time to go, oh, right, okay, yeah, I need this. And then, I will look at what the metagame is sort of asking and figure out how I want to answer it within that framework, and look for, packages. Do I need a Rest in Peace package? Do I need Gruul Charm package? Like, do I need Fire Spouts in the main or something like that? So I don't... Go ahead. Well,
So I was going to bring up the Grand Prix Calgary winning deck. The Jund Breach deck is a great example of this. It's got the Primeval Titan core, which is kind of like you're playing Primeval Titan, Search for tomorrow, Sakura Tribelzer, Valakut the Molten Pinnacle, and then whatever the required number of mountains is to win the game once you do that. And then from there, you're making this decision of like, well, do I need to go fast? Then I put in the Through the Breach package, which is like Summoner's Pact, Through the Breach, and Woodfall Primus. And then what's my removal package? So you have like your Fatal Pushes and your Engineered Explosives, or it could be like Lightning Bolt and Anger of the Gods 1 week. So that kind of back and forth there is basically the same thing that happened.
It is something that I don't think people do enough in terms of like, you know, people are always like, oh, you can't metagame modern, you can't metagame modern. And like, yes, asterisk, like I don't think you change 30 cards a week, but I think you probably change 5 cards a week maybe, or like one or two packages, right? If you want to think of them in that sort of modular way. I think people could be making more effective week to week choices, thinking about it in this framework. And I'll put something in I'll put it in the show notes of just some examples, because they're, without like deep diving into a particular deck would take a very long time. I'll post an example of like how I came to like Naya Phoenix. You know, I took that Phoenix core and I was like, man, Path to Exile is really good. That, and then sort of what naturally comes with that. There's a returning mechanic in War of the Spark.
Yep.
Why don't you bring us through that whole...
Yeah. So they've announced that Proliferate from Scars of Mirrodin is returning in War of the Spark. So the obvious thing is it's a Planeswalker focused set, and Planeswalkers use loyalty counters. Proliferate lets you add counters to any number of permanents or players. You add a counter of it's now been updated to each type on that permanent or player, which it's got some weird narrow corner cases, but generally, you know, you'll choose a Planeswalker, you'll add loyalty to it. If you have another one, you'll add another loyalty to that one, you know, +1/+1 counter on a creature. So we were talking about this deck building in packages, and I did a little gatherer search going through like what's actually in standard, and it turns out there's a lot of existing packages of cards that if there just happened to be a card that said do something normal and then also proliferate, they would be kind of interested in playing it. So the card I want to bring up from the past is like Tezzeret's Gambit, which was kind of three and a Phyrexian mana to draw 2 cards and proliferate. And that's just like, well, you might play that anyways, and then if you got proliferate value out of it, that's really good. So there's a lot of things like that in standard where that could come up. So one of those is the Merfolk package. So you have Benthic Biomancer, Jade Guardian, and Deeproot Elite all spreading counters around your Merfolk. And if you just happen to have, I don't know, one of the Merfolk in this set proliferates, that's a way to add power to your creatures going down that road. If there's a spell that does that while countering a spell or something like that, that's just an effect that you might actually be interested in. There's the, sort of along the Merfolk lines, the Merfolk Branchwalker, Jadelet Ranger, Wildgrowth Walker package that's all explore. If there's a removal spell that proliferates, that might be a valuable pickup for Golgari-based decks, or a Planeswalker that maybe, you know, I don't know how they splice that in, but you know, that's something where like you're adding power to your existing creatures that you already want to be attacking with. The white creature decks with Venerated Loxodon and Unbreakable Formation are adding counters to their creatures, so you can layer pump effects that way with the Proliferate card. The Gruul decks with Pelt Collector and Zertog Goblin and Cruel Spellbreaker, all counters on their creatures. And if they go down the Explore package route, which is a little dicey with Pelt Collector, but, you know, a lot of similar things, you might end up in a spot where you have all these creatures, and if there's a green creature that proliferates on some other trigger, you're incrementing your already good creatures just kind of for free. And the other weird one is that Proliferate works with sagas. So it adds the counter to the saga, which immediately triggers it. So you can kind of skip some steps on sagas if you're trying to like rapidly trigger a Mending of Dominaria in the weird Scapeshift decks people have talked about. Song of Frailes works on a lot of levels with Proliferate, both leaving counters around to double pump your team, and then also you can kind of boost through if you are in a late game setup to get a faster overrun effect. So there's a lot of these kind of small things put together with Proliferate.
Yeah. Does the saga trigger if there was an instant speed Proliferate spell, would it trigger then, or does it only trigger on your turn?
It triggers immediately, but you can't trigger it more than the 3 chapters. So like if it's something like, I'm trying to remember the exact wording on how it, like the adding counters and sacrificing works, but you can't like double trigger the last one. Like once it hits 3, it's spent.
Oh, okay. Got it. You can't like respond to that.
Yeah. The 4th counter doesn't do anything.
It just happens. Got it. Huh.
It puts the trigger on the stack, but putting a 4th counter on it doesn't put a 4th trigger on the stack.
Got it.
Yeah.
Interesting. So like bringing back Proliferate, like historically the Proliferate cards, other than like Tezzeret's Gambit, was the only like Tezzeret's Gambit, Contagion Clasp, and the big one, is it Contagion Engine?
Yep.
Is that the one? Proliferate, then Proliferate again, and Throne of Geth, I think, are the ones that ended up seeing like some kind of play, and the ones that see play in Eternal formats to a varying degree. Not so much Contagion Clasp, but
yep. Clasp was important when it existed in Standard more so than older formats.
Yeah. What I'm trying to figure out is if there's an Infect deck in Modern that's basically like just an Infect prison where there's a couple of creatures that have like ETB poison counter, like Icor Rats, I think is one of them. Yep. I want to say there's a second one, but I wonder if there's a world where you're just like, here's your single Infect counter, like here's your poison counter, and then you just sit behind a Ensnaring Bridge and Proliferate every turn until they die.
I'm kind of wondering if there's a cheap Proliferate effect, if the Hardened Scales deck, that's what I'm looking at with that. There's also the one that's interesting to me off the top of my head there is Karn's Bastion. It's a land that taps for a colorless. You can pay 4 and tap it to Proliferate. So if, it's not a huge cost in the Hardened Scales deck to have a colorless land, and Proliferate's kind of a big deal there. So that might be what you're talking about. That deck often has spots where, chips in with a small Inkmoth Nexus, maybe a couple times, and then Proliferate with Throne of Geth can close the door. So that land is within reason for that deck.
I was very surprised that land didn't have a sack clause, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. It's
just, like Proliferate every turn for some like dirtily control deck.
It feels like you can get shockingly close to a card of value out of it every turn. Or the other thing I looked through when I was looking through the format was what Planeswalkers, specifically Ultimate, like there's this specific pattern where like, obviously like if you have Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and you Proliferate it, it gets to Ultimate faster. But if you have Teferi and you've plussed it, you're gonna win anyways if you want tap. So you don't really care. It's like Planeswalkers that don't protect themselves the best, but they plus, and you can kind of tick them really fast to a really devastating Ultimate. And the ones I found were the M19 Tezzeret that makes Thopters, and the Ultimate gets you a permanent every turn. Ral, is it Viceroy? If you can Proliferate him twice, like the pattern is it normally takes the 4th turn at Ultimates, but if you like play it, Proliferate at that turn, and Proliferate at the next turn, it just goes off, and that Ultimate is just lethal of casting spells and dealing damage and drawing cards. And then Sarkon, the 3-mana Sarkon from M19 obviously doesn't protect itself. The Ultimate is make 20 power of dragons, so Proliferating that one, similar really quick pattern to Ultimate. So that's kind of the ones that jumped out at me. Also, the weird one was Magistrate's Scepter, which is an artifact, you pay mana and add charge counters to it, and you can take extra turns. But then technically with Proliferate, you can start doing some weird snowbally things where you start taking more and more turns, and it's a really bad Nexus of Fate. But
yeah, I'm not proud to say that I have seen someone play that in Modern, in the core tapper surge node, like that whole thing. I mean, it's very unpleasant to play against. I will I will say that. I was confused. I was hurt. And I let him do it. I was like, you know what? You put a lot of work into this. I'm going to let you have some fun. And then I'm going to Kolaghan's Command and kill you. But for a little while, they were living the dream. I did something like this with Oath of Gideon. That was during Eldrazi Winter. I was like, I'm not playing Eldrazi. I eventually did play Eldrazi very briefly, but I used it was Oath of Gideon, and then Elsbeth Terrell was kind of like the big, because she would ultimate the turn. Oops.
She starts. This is the Scars of Mirrodin one.
Yeah. There we go.
So that's 5 mana, starts at 4 loyalty, and then it's -5 to destroy all other permanents except for lands and tokens.
So if you go like Oath of Gideon, Gideon Ally of Zendikar, her, you end up with a pretty strong board compared to your opponent's lands. And this in this theoretical Proliferate world, obviously I don't think they're going to reprint this particular one, but in Modern there are certainly decks that want that want a 5 mana board wipe, super board wipe. It served me well. It killed many. Speaking of Thought-Knot Seer, it killed many Thought-Knot Seers. And also I really like this card. I know it is not the best Elspeth. I understand that, but I have a soft spot for this that particular card from that time period. So sort of talking about the value of that Proliferate off the Karn land. What is it called? Karn's Bastion. One of the things that, once again, people sort of talk about in an offhanded way, I think, is card advantage, right? And I don't know that everybody has a really strong grasp of what that means in gameplay terms and why it is important. Why do we care about card advantage? What's your definition of card advantage?
So I guess the why we care is obviously that, every card affords you with decisions that allow you to progress, and eventually, one of those decisions is often being able to exchange it for your opponent's cards, or just, take actions that get you further card advantage. So you have both situations where you have more flexibility of options. You could end up in a spot where you've reduced your opponent's no resources and end up with resources yourself. That's a very common one in Constructed if you think about the green-black deck we were talking about before. So if you're talking about what it is, it's not just, exchanging for the raw resource that's generated every turn of drawing a card. There's a lot of other ways to, anytime you spend a card and you end up with a card plus something, and then you can get into some nitty-gritty details of virtual cards where I've spent a card and I played a 1 mana 1/1, and then everyone else played a bunch of 2/2s. That 1/1 is not worth a card. It's, in the context of what we've done, that 1/1 is worth half of whatever other card is worth. So there's a lot of this kind of splitting hairs that ends up coming out in the end to being someone has played the highest number of relevant cards this game, and then is left with a relevant card at the end of the game. So it's kind of a, people who play chess, different pieces are worth different points because they have different values of like how they interact with the board. When you're like thinking about like, well, how far ahead am I in a game? You can assign a point value. It's like, well, this is just card advantage, and it's a lot more discreet because here's a physical card.
Sure. Yeah, I saw it's a weirdly tangentially related. I watched a video this morning of, it was Gary Kasparov, and he was like, there's some series on YouTube, and I don't remember who does it, but they basically pull people in and they're like, answer people's dumb Twitter questions about the thing that you're an expert on. And so they had Kasparov on, and somebody was like bishop or knight, and he went on this like 2-minute diatribe about like how he evaluated one of them as like 3.5, but Bobby Fischer evaluated it as 3.2, and it's just sort of like, I sat there and I was like, the genesis of this topic for me was, I was during the Ethan Fleischer interview, I was talking about, like, I asked him about sort of threads that I had noticed that were coming up a lot, and one of them was this like random unearth mechanic that started to show up, where it's just like, return target creature with power 2 or less or 3 or less to the battlefield. And I was like, that used to be like a pretty rare thing, and now it's just like all over the place. And I was like, well, because he worked on Amonkhet, and I was like, what's the deal with Devoted Cropmate? Like, why are all these reanimate, like all these unearth effects coming up? And he was like, oh yeah, he's like, we think of that as like white card advantage. And that was a really interesting sort of view into how they think of like card advantage in the different colors, because obviously like blue is just like draw cards, right? Cast a spell, spend a card, get 2 cards back. But so being able to recycle your dudes in white was their concession to that, where they're like, you get to keep crunch all you want. We'll make more. I'm struggling to find like green card advantage. Like the rest of them are fairly obvious. Once that sort of clicked into place, and I was like, oh, got it. Unearth is white card advantage. Blue is just blue. Red is like looting and or rummaging, depending on the set. And then black obviously is just pay life.
So the notable one with black is also so like a card, if you've drafted Ravnica Allegiance a lot, there's Dead Revels, which is return 2 creatures from your graveyard to your hand, which is card advantage. It takes some setup. You get 2 cards out of it. But notably, if you're playing limited a lot, you'll notice that those cards in late games are significantly more effective than cards that say draw 2. Not just because you get to choose what you get, but because it's always getting you back 2 spells that you get to cast, and none of the cards you can get back are lands. So that's kind of interesting. Red has obviously got, like, they're currently pushing the light up the stage style stuff. And they're also sometimes like proactive card advantage, like dual shot, deal damage to 2 different things, ways to get 2 cards out of 1 card. And then green's kind of, they kind of don't, the green card advantage, actually, I know the answer to this. The green card advantage is Colossal Dreadmaw. So the same idea where you cast 1 spell and it produces 2 cards out of it. When you play a creature that is that large, especially at least in limited, you play a creature that is that large and you attack with it, your opponent has to block with 2 creatures. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes you end up leveraging, like, they block with a 3/3 and a 4/4. And, like, technically they'll only lose 1 creature, and then you play a pump spell, and then you traded your 1 pump spell for 2 creatures. And so that's how green kind of generates card advantage in limited, is just having things that are big enough that you can force these double blocks and then leverage that position, which is also at the same time kind of awkward because your opponent's, it's almost like a Punisher spell of sorts, where your opponent gets to choose the situation that you're getting card advantage out of it. But that's how they that's where the green card advantage kind of is. Also, I think they're fine with giving green just like random cantrips. And then obviously, we saw Explore as that kind of mechanic rooted in green.
Sure.
Occasionally, like invest, they kind of just like, whenever there's a mechanic that produces, a partial card, like Investigate, it's like, well, it's a card, but you have to pay mana for it later. It's like, well, we'll throw that on Tireless Tracker and someone will figure it out. Explore, it's like, well, there's a Jade Light Ranger. So that's kind of, I think, where they've been these like weird half mechanics. They don't really want to draw a card on too many green creatures, but at the same time, they find a lot of ways to make green creatures that say, well, you'll play this and then you'll get a 3/2 and then you'll also draw a land.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there hasn't been an Elvish Visionary in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, there's been like Beast Whisperer that turns all your creatures into Elvish Visionaries. Generous Stray, but that card is so far down the list that it barely counts as an Elvish Visionary.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Beast Whisperer. Okay, sure. It's like it's conditional, right? Like it doesn't generate cards on its own.
Yeah,
you still have to do something.
Yeah, you're allowed to draw cards. They just all have to have power and toughness.
Yeah. Interesting. So that's all right. That is something that I will kick around. Because I always, as I think about the game in different ways, a lot of what I spend my time and energy on in terms of the game is deck building, and that's being able to identify how colors do certain things in a sort of black and white way and not in a intuitive way, because you can very much go, oh well, I have seen this card played, or like, oh that text seems to work with this text, but it's more academic deck building, I think, is something that I think I'd like to work on, because as much as I like sort of fun deck building, I really think that maybe that's one of my goals for this year, is like build a tournament performing deck that's not like just some copy of something else.
Yeah, it's something that isn't just like, here are some good cards and they're in the deck together, and here's a mythic rare and some removal.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that process definitely happens, right? Like decks don't come from nowhere, and they certainly sometimes I think they do progress organically, but there are definitely people out there that are thinking about decks and sort of deck construction in different ways, and ways that sort of beget those decks where then you go, oh, okay, sure, Death Shadow and Street Wraith, that makes sense. And then you're like, Mishra's Bauble? Is that a thing? And then it turns out to be the thing, and the reason is, it's the closest thing we have to a brainstorm. And if you want to run low on lands, you need Delve Fuel. Like, it checks off all the boxes. So I think that is an interesting thing to think about.
The person I think that had the single best, I don't know about like full on execution of this, but at least the start, was Michael Majors. Before he joined R&D, he was really good at kind of picking up, we're talking about, well, what is the fundamental, what is the card advantage here? What is the package of this? He was really good at kind of just like putting together decks, and then looking at like some package and then shuffling it together with another package and ending up with a deck. He would often, fixate on a specific idea and kind of go down like the Metalwork Colossus rabbit hole a little too far. But he was the one who found a lot of interesting things, like, I believe, I'm trying to think what exact shells he found in like the Kaladesh era. and before that, where it was just kind of like, oh, I was trying this out, and I really liked Grapple with the Past, and I trying to traverse the Ulvenwald or whatever in a deck, and then that ended up getting spliced in with something else, and then eventually you had, on that day there was the Emrakul Delirium Grapple deck that was just absurdly good, and that's kind of where the genesis of that came from.
Yeah. Oh man, Emrakul the Promised End.
Fair and fun Magic card, right?
Hey, every once in a while I go, has it been so long since Mindslaver was printed that you thought it was fun again?
But it cost so much mana the first time.
Yeah, because I was not playing particularly a lot or competitively at the time, but I do not recall that ever being fun.
It was interesting the first time. When I've gotten Mindslavered in Limited, and it was certainly fun to have it happen. But yes, it's a lot. It is a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot going on. What are you playing right now? I'm still kind of on the same train as I was last week, which was just playing Terramander and Huntmaster in the same deck, and cheating soldiers into play, finding new and weird soldiers in the archives, and trying to make Phoenix with Path to Exile work.
So I've been the kind of trial and error deck has been the Izzet Restore Balance deck. So it's the Electro Dominance As Foretold Shell. It's another Remand deck where it's again using Remand to just stall the game until its key combo turn, where it's uses As Foretold or Electro Dominance to play Restore Balance, sacrifices all of its lands to a suspended Greater Gargadon, and then the game kind of sets itself up where your opponent has a couple cards in hand, no lands and no creatures, and then you have a 9/7 and then it hits them. And that deck was shockingly effective. I wrote a bit about it on Star City this week. It's really kind of... It feels really close. Like the original Restore Balance deck I played a couple years ago, the Border Post Cascade list that's similar to the Living End kind of dynamic that existed, where it's I'm gonna play Violent Outburst or whatever. That deck had some serious flaws, but once you start being able to play, Serum Visions and Opt and Ancestral Vision in your blue-red combo deck, it starts looking like you have more flexibility to answer a lot of the weird stuff that people are showing up with, and it's close. Like I said, really, really close to where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, the Cascade stuff I think is almost fully replaced now by the stuff there's Electro Dominance, As Foretold, Karizev's Expertise. I think between the non-Cascade cards that can cast those unmana spells, I would be... I mean, people still play old school Living End, and it's still good, but I think that there is a very real possibility that there's a at least as good or better build that just doesn't have Demonic Dread.
That gets to play Cryptic Command or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you get to actually play. You don't have to play Brindlebore anymore. You can just play a good spell.
Yeah, that is a prime example. Wow.
Yeah, that's Living In sideboard is a running gag from the beginning of the show. We would look at these cards and be where did you even find this card? And it's some dopey, limited chaff filler, but it just happens to cost 4 mana. So,
yep.
All right, well, let's get in there.
There were Mardu Charms on my Cascade versus Restore Balance list, so I'm well on board with understanding where you have to go for that.
Whew.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah.
Boy. Any other? What else are you tinkering with?
I've been just testing out some Amulet Titan. You know, if I I played that deck on and off for a while, and I think you just got to stay fresh with it and get, you know, a lot of the motions in place every time you want to get good with it. So Peter Glogowski, aka Canister, aka Mythic Invitational finalist with the silly hat, has been playing Amulet Titan on Magic Online lately. He's been trying a lot more aggressive lists. He's been trying a list with Serum Visions and Zakama and 28 lands and a lot less of the toolbox cards. So like no Engineered Explosives, no Walking Ballista, no Bajuka Bog, just lands that play your spells. And then sideboarding in whatever the right tutor target is. And then he's been trying a list that's very similar to the pre-Summer Bloom ban list. That's Hive Mind and Pax, as well as the Titan Kill. So I've been fiddling around with those and just kind of checking them out and seeing how things go. So that's the other thing I've been playing recently.
Any preliminary conclusions?
Zakama is great, and I was told Zakama was great at Grand Prix LA by my friend Danny Batterman, who finished in the top 32, and he told me it was great before the event, and I did believe him, and now I fully believe him, and he was right all along. So if you play Amulet Titan, I would really play one Zakama. It just kind of is... You end up in these spots where your opponent sometimes kills your first Titan, but the second Titan can't, like, pull all the pieces together, and if you just play Zakama, your opponent is going to die in some horrible way to all of their creatures dying, or all of their enchantments, artifacts dying, or you gaining a bunch of life, or just getting hit with a 9/9 Vigilance, Reach, Trample. Yes, it has Reach. It blocks Arclight Phoenix. Basically, the only thing it's missing is the card type Horror, so it would not get bounced by Thing in the Ice, and that's it.
Wow. I mean, and hey, you know what? If you're already here, you're only a single color splash away from Arcane Adaptation, and then you can really just clinch it.
Yeah.
And then, oh wow, I did not realize that it had Vigilance and Reach, and there's
a lot going on, lots of
text
process
in that card. Holy crap! Yikes.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. One of the other, I thought about doing a through the breach dinosaur deck, because like a lot of these elder dinosaurs, it turns out, are pretty crazy. I mean, like even is it Talpa? Is that
the double strike flying one?
Yeah, the white one.
Yep.
Flying, double strike, vigilance, trample, indestructible.
Those are a lot of keywords.
Or no, I'm thinking of the red one.
Itali, the 4 red trample. Is it trample? And whenever it hits a player, you get to cast the top card of each deck for free? Or is it whatever it attacks?
4 red. Whenever it attacks, exile the top card of each player's library, then you may cast any number of non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. Like, this feels like a strong thing to breach.
Yeah, it's a weird form of red card advantage.
And you're just like, it sort of, you being able to chain this into an Emrakul would be pretty great. Like, I think you're pretty well winning the game when it hits, or even if it doesn't hit, even if it gets blocked, because this, for the trade-off, I'm making air quotes here, the trade-off is that it like doesn't have trample, which is weird, being that it's a 6/6 elder dinosaur. But I guess being able to cast things for free. Oh my god, this goes perfectly into the Spice Rack card.
Ooh, yes.
Amazing. Okay. So before we get to the Spice Rack, you can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Turn One Thoughtseize, all spelled out. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at T1Thoughtseize. Ari is at ARMLX. You can watch a stream at twitch.tv/T1Thoughtseize, sponsored by our friends at Card Hoarder. You can see our YouTube videos at youtube.com/Turn One Thoughtseize, all spelled out. You can read my columns at blog.cardkingdom.com. You can read Ari's columns at starcitygames.com. You can become a member of the Thoughtseize Cabal at patreon.com/Turn One Thoughtseize, all spelled out. And you can see all of our content on turn1thoughtseize.com. The Spice Rare card this week is Set Adrift and Compare and Contrast with Rite of Undoing. And we will come back to Itali the Primal Storm after we explain what these cards do. So Set Adrift is 5 and a blue. It is a sorcery. It has Delve, and it's put target non-land permanent on top of its owner's library. When we were talking about this card, the reason it came up is because it was
so the Echoing Truth is a Phoenix deck,
right?
So obviously, with a bunch of Pyromancer Ascension, you can't really play a Delve spell. But the lists that have a little bit less on the Ascension front have often been found with this card in their deck. Which is kind of funny. It was kind of a joke back in the day when Cons was released that, they're going to have to ban all the Delve cards, and then one day we're going to find that, that Set Adrift is playable. Well, it turns out it is. It's very similar to Echoing Truth in terms of answering anything, including an Ensnaring Bridge. It reduces the cost of itself to 1, so it's kind of more efficient at times. And the fact that it maintains card parity, so it puts the permanent on top of its owner's library. So you Echoing Truth a creature, you're just down a card. You Set Adrift a creature, your opponent has to redraw it. And especially in the case of Thing in the Ice, that can often be a liability because if you've invested a couple spells, you might not have all the spells to retransform it or whatever. And in Phoenix Mirror matches, having a way to remove a 7/8 Thing in the Ice, like I said, that's very important. And guess what? This card does exactly that.
Yeah. So while we were talking about this card, I couldn't remember the card, but I had played Rite of Undoing in a couple of decks because it was instant speed. So there's a bunch of these kinds of spells that are put in target non-land permanent you control and target non-land permanent you don't control, like into their hand. I think there are some variants that are top of the library, but I know this one in particular is back to your hand. It's 4 and a blue. It's instant. It also has Delve, and it was it's an interesting sort of complement to this idea of sometimes you just need to get something out of the way. And it's another way to do it. I don't know that Rite of Undoing is particularly playable, but the instant speed is something. Like I can imagine a world where you're like, they have an unflipped Thing in the Ice, and you have a Snapcaster Mage, and you're like, let's do it. Like bounce your thing, get my Snapcaster back. I don't know if that's a world that exists often enough to make it playable.
It's just worth keeping an eye on a lot of these Delve spells, because there's often going to be a spot where it's like, well, maybe I don't want to play any other Delve spell, but I need just this exact effect, and boom, there's something there that does it for way too little mana for no reason. That was kind of the reason you didn't see Set Adrift for years, was that it was like, well, I'm competing with Gurmag Angler, and 5/5 is better than putting a permanent on top of someone's library. But right now, we're finally in a world where we're not doubling up on Delve spells with Gurmag Angler or Murderer's Cut or whatever. And now you have this card coming at me like, well, maybe it's playable. And, if there's other formats, there's, Pauper or whatever, and you've seen a lot of these common Delve spells that you'd be shocked to see play there. So Delve is a mechanic that is really just always worth keeping an eye on. The spells are going to be broken to some extent. Playing spells for cheaper or for free is kind of ridiculous.
And if you can use Set Adrift to set up your Itali, so when you through the breach your Itali, it will you're guaranteed to get at least one spell that you want off the top of your opponent's library. And that is synergy.
That would definitely be something I consider off the spice rack.
Yeah, indeed. All right. Well, that is it for us for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch up with you next time.